So let's welcome Ian.
Well, thank you very much, and opportunity to talk about our organisation and volunteers. When Nick asked me to speak today, he sent this title, Why Volunteering Makes Sense. I thought he was a spelling mistake there for a little while there, but so what I've tried to do is put together a presentation that talks about sense in a C and sense with an S. So what I intend to do is talk a little bit about our organisation, give you some facts and figures on what we've achieved since 1982 when we commenced, and then get to the point about why volunteering makes sense. Our organisation started in Ballarat in Victoria in 1982. Some of you in the audience would know all about that. The organisation was called the Australian Trust for Conservation Volunteers. It's only in recent years it's changed its name to Conservation Volunteers, so we're now CVA and we're CVNZ. We're in essence the same organisation. We're not a funded organisation. We basically live on our wits. We seek funding from corporate supporters, and we do a lot of work what we would call fee for service. And roughly speaking, it's about 50-50. In New Zealand, it is 50-50. So we have some quite substantial corporate supporters helping us deliver our mission, when I can touch on those later. And then we also have a lot of, I guess, project partners that actually pay for our services. In Australia, we also have a significant amount of income that comes from the various levels of government for running major programs that are both environmental and often youth-based skills development programs. We've worked for many, many years with a simple vision, but like a lot of other organisations, about 4 or 5 years ago, we went through a complete review, and our mission has now become a vision and a mission and a set of objectives. And I think it's our success over the years has been probably because we've stuck to the one product, the one vision, or the mission. But it's been great to sort of spread this out a little bit, particularly the two highlighted sections down the bottom, which is much more about the people outcomes, which really, when you analyse what we've done all over the years and what we do every day, it's really about the difference we make to people in the process of getting their hands dirty in the environment. And that's certainly something that's changed in my mind. When I started 16, 17 years ago, I was probably, like a lot of people, geez, how many trees can we plant? How many trees can we plant? What difference can we make? But I've pretty much done a 180 degree now. It's about how much difference can we make to people by planting trees. That's really what it's all about. Okay, so who are we? As I've said before, we're a fairly big organisation. We have something like 30 odd offices across both countries. We would class ourselves as the biggest practical group in Australasia. We're not-for-profit, we're community-based. We still work with a simple voluntary board. 3 or 4 of our board members today are still from the original board in 1982, and most of those are from a farm background in Victoria. But we do now have representatives from New Zealand and other sectors of the community. In a given year, we would run the best part of 4,000 projects. A project can take us 1 day, or it can take us 6 months. And we've also, in these days, we're involved in involving volunteers in practical work on some sites for perhaps a 5 or 10 years period. So we're becoming far more ownerships of the projects we're involved in. We do that in various models. I mean, we recruit volunteers and we will give them single placements on a project that needs a particular skill. I guess we're most famous, or our traditional model project. As I said before, we've also run very successfully in Australia a model that's known as Green Corps, and all of its various derivatives from that. That has been funded by the national government over there, but there's also state-based models, South Australian Youth Corps, Queensland Green Army. They're all pretty much the same model. They're basically youth-based programs. They look the same on the ground. They're, 10 people in a bus with a team that are going off and doing a conservation project. We also, again, in recent times, have is reducing burnout to the community groups, because sometimes we can send a team to help them for a week and we'll achieve what the group themselves would have taken a year to do, and it just gives them a whole fresh motivation to go on and on and on. And I think I get quite excited by that, but it is a very hard thing to measure. It's not something we can collect in our database, but we do see it all the time. The other selling point of the way we manage volunteers, a lot of the conservation work or practical conservation work that is needed is in areas where there isn't a local community. So we have run many, many programs over the years, what you would call remote programs, urban rural link type programs where we recruit people into population centres and take them to a very remote coastline or something and do a coast care type activity, because basically there wasn't a community group in that area. Those sorts of projects are normally identified through the conservation agencies, DOC, etc. I did mention that we're more involved. We do own 3 properties now as an organisation, which was unheard of 5 years ago. That took about 25 board meetings before they agreed to do that. But we have 2 properties in Victoria, both of which have been donated to us, and one in Tasmania at the moment. So, and the one in Victoria particularly, which is known locally as the Island, because it has basically a stream down either side of a big lump of land we're quite proud of, where it's 220 hectares, and we've managed to, we're 3/4 of the way through totally revegetating that, which is the one we won the United Nations Award for. We funded that all through corporate sponsorship for voluntary carbon offsets, not formal carbon offsets, but just voluntary. We raised nearly $1 million for all the materials and to cover our costs, and we've used every type of volunteer you can imagine. We've had international travellers there. We have, because it's only 40 kilometres out of Melbourne City, we have endless corporate volunteering out there, and everything else you can imagine. So it's a really good example of linking the corporate world with the community, with all the environmental agencies, with unemployed people, with university students, a whole lot, and we got a fantastic outcome. And it's only been going 5 years, and for the first time in the last season, we've had birds nesting in the first tree, so I think it's a really good outcome. We also, apart from the 3 projects locations we own, we also manage several parks on behalf of the Conservation Agency. Not something we're doing in New Zealand yet, but maybe we will eventually. Probably the best one, there's a site called Brookfield State Park, which is just a couple of 100 kilometres north of Adelaide, which is where really the Conservation Agency, as they all around the world, they don't have enough resources to manage the land they've got. Asked if we pay them $1 a year for their park, and then we manage their park on their behalf. And we fund that again through ecotourism and things like that. So it's very entrepreneurial. So who are our volunteers? Again, I'm coming back to numbers. Well, our volunteers are everybody. We don't discriminate. We have a whole gamut of models of engaging volunteers, all aimed at the particular demographic or what it is they're after. But if you add them all together, we probably manage about 12,500 volunteers in a given year. We also do a lot of corporate volunteering. Corporate volunteering has become a big part of our work in the last probably 5 to 6 years, particularly in the major capital cities, and we do a lot in Auckland here as well. Corporate volunteering is initially, I guess, we saw it as a way of hopefully getting some sponsorship out of the corporate, but it's turned out to be a very effective way to get a lot of work done as well. But having said that, it does open the door for us to create a relationship with corporates to hopefully get some substantial dollars to fund other activities. It's very effective. So that's a little bit about the organisation. So why does volunteering make sense? I'm just going to talk money here for a second. As I said, we do about 150,000 days in a given year. If you calculate that out on the average sort of value of a volunteer hour that most governments seem to, or grant agencies seem to use, it's roughly about $30 million worth of volunteer labour. It costs us about $11 million, $11.5 million to do that. So we raise 11.5 of real money from somewhere, the various sources, and as a result, we're achieving $30 million on the ground. So for people who just think of dollars, it's basically a 3 to 1. So it does make sense with a C. However, and I think certainly from my perspective, it's the difference we make to other things besides, it's much more than money. environmentally involved and skilled citizens. Now, I'll just refer you back to the objectives I had up earlier on. One of the objectives is to do that. So how do we do that? When our volunteers participate, we're not consider them labour, or we try not to use the word work. You know, they are there because they have their motivations, and it will all be different. Our challenge, hopefully, is that when they go away at the end of the project, they're a little bit greener, and they will live in a more sustainable way for the rest of their life. And if you could measure that, that is a much bigger outcome for the environment than what they did on the particular day. I'm not going to read through that. I think it's fairly obvious. I mean, so they just become more aware of the environment. I mean, a typical day with our teams and volunteers, we don't get out of the bus and start work. We get out of the bus, we do a risk assessment as far as safety. What could happen today? How can we reduce or eliminate any risks, first of all? But secondly, we then talk about the big picture. Why are we pulling out these weeds today? It's not because we want to pull out weeds. I mean, it would be hard to attract volunteers if you just advertise it as weed pulling. But if you can say you're restoring the habitat for XYZ species by the removal of exotic species, then you've got a chance of getting the volunteers. So it's, we're selling that, and I think it's what's crucial is that the volunteers, any kind of volunteer, understands that whilst the work may be monotonous and repetitive, they understand what is the big picture at the end of the day, and they feel proud of that because they've played their part in the big team. Of course, they work alongside other nationalities, other ages, and just mixing, rubbing shoulders. They understand. They become more tolerant. They understand other cultures, other age groups, and so on. Then I guess the bottom one, which most people would probably think is the primary one, they also learn skills: how to build a fence, how to collect seed, how to plant a tree, and so on. And obviously, those things may be very useful. So we shouldn't assume that they're all doing this to get skills so they can get a job. Most of them are just doing it for an environmental positive experience. Okay, going back to the second objective that I had earlier on, improved well-being to the individuals. I could talk about this for a long time, but we have programs now that we actually run for health outcomes. We don't even talk about the environment. We involve people as volunteers They do the same thing out on the ground, but we get the funding and we're measured in what health difference we make to the individuals, which is a very interesting way. And it opens up a whole raft of new sponsors and government agencies and government departments for actually raising money to do conservation work. We have become quite creative. I've talked about burnout. Urban-rural link is an interesting one. It's New Zealand and Australia are the same. There's often a conflict, if you like, between the people in the cities and the people in the rural areas, and involving people in the cities and taking them out to the country and getting involved in practical work is a really good way of breaking that down and making everyone realise we're all the same. We all need the same food and we're all going to breathe the same air. So you can't be blaming the way the farmers manage their land, and the farmers shouldn't be blaming, saying all the city folk are such as either. We're all in it together. There's another practical outcome. When we send a team of 10 volunteers to a country town for a week, they spend a lot of money. They probably spend more money, I would suggest, in the shops, local shops, than what we charge for our costs. So that is another, benefit that I'd point out when we're trying to raise funding from councils and things. So why does volunteering make sense? In summary, it makes a difference to the individuals, it really makes a difference to the environment, and it makes a difference to the community. So I think no matter how you spell sense, it works both ways. And just to give you an example of our current corporate supporters in New Zealand, I'll just put those logos up. There's a lot of other smaller ones as well, but they're probably the significance we work with. So I won't go in and describe all those. So there you go. That's volunteering has a crucial part to play. I did say in the paperwork that came out to everyone, if you want to get 1 million trees planted really quick, just get 1 million people to do one each, and it only takes 5 minutes. So at the end of the day, the only way we're going to get all the work done is by getting all the people involved. And where do all the people live? In the cities. Thank you very much.